Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Chocolate Travels. I'm here with Connor from Chocolate Thunder, and we're going to learn all about the incredible chocolate that he makes in Michigan. So, hello, Connor. Nice to meet you.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. So, let's start off by bringing up an interesting point that I saw on your website. You said that big manufacturers have been burning the flavors away in regards to chocolate. So, how have they done this? What do you mean by that? And why do you think they've been doing this?
Yeah, so their roasting profiles are pretty heavy, and I imagine that they do this to standardize the flavor because when you bite, a Hershey or a Lindt or something like that, the chocolate has to be the same from one bar to the next. That's just good business for them.
Hmm.
But in order to do that, they're kind of neutralizing any variation that exists in the cocoa bean and then coating it, covering it up with vanilla.
Hmm.
So another reason I imagine they're doing that is because the quality of cacao they're getting low quality cacao, and the fermentation is just, field fermentation. You're not controlling it. You don't have probes in there. You're not getting a perfect ferment. So that flavor is probably not very uniform. So it's best in their best interest to just roast it all the way and then put vanilla on top.
Right, right. And that's a really good point because a lot of people think that they understand the flavor of chocolate, but really what you're
Right.
talking about is a very watered down version of perhaps what chocolate really should be. So
Right.
that's a really good point. I like that I saw that on your website. Keeping the first question in mind, how does your chocolate and those made by other artisan bean to bar makers differ from your Hershey, Nestle, Cadbury bars?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, the origin. So craft chocolate and single origin is almost synonymous. Once you discover that different regions taste different, you really want to highlight that. And there's so many more interesting origins than the Ivory Coast, where you just get that solid cocoa flavor, which is great. But I find Madagascar much more interesting.
Mm.
Vietnam, the raspberry Madagascar, the raisin and fig of Vietnam. I've had a peach ring flavored bean from Peru. So just that in itself is huge. But then knowing how to roast so that you're actually able to highlight those flavors. A good example of that was Madagascar. I have a really, really light roast. That's probably my lightest roast. Just tweaking that to try to lower some of the acidity because
Mhm.
that raspberry note, that's 8 out of 10, comes with a lot of acidity.
Right.
So just to try to tone that back, I added 30 seconds and a minute. And the 30-second add ended up being a good balance. But 1 minute longer, the raspberry goes from an 8 out of 10 down to a 2. And
Mhm.
then this pepper note comes out.
Okay.
So even if you get single origin and you try to highlight that, you could blow right through an over roasted bean and not even get those special flavors.
Right.
So the flavor, quality of ingredients, local impact, you're supporting small businesses, better farm wages because craft chocolate makers are paying more for the beans. It's really like grape juice to wine. That's the comparison between the craft chocolate movement and big chocolate.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's interesting too how, like you said, 30 seconds more roasting can completely
Yeah,
change the flavor profile. So as a chocolate maker, some people say, oh, it's just a matter of grinding up some cocoa beans, which that's part of it. It is essentially grinding up cocoa beans,
yeah,
but there's very specific methods involved that can really transform the overall flavor of your chocolate.
right.
And so that's,
Yeah,
I
and I
think,
mean, and it's not just roasting. I don't want to
no, but that's a
misspeak
big part
because
of it.
obviously the refining process, you depending on when you add sugar, can lock in flavor.
Right.
How long you let it refine or conch is going to change things tremendously. So there's so many moving parts. It's very easy to miss the mark.
Right, right. But I think it comes down to you have that really good cocoa bean, that good ingredient, and it's just the method you use to bring out the flavors. Whereas the
Right.
industrial chocolate, like you said, they have to add things in order
Yeah.
to make it taste good, right?
Right.
So let's start now a little bit more from the beginning then, and let's understand more about your life and what pulled you into chocolate making in Michigan. How did that come about?
Yeah. Chocolate. I feel like I grew up around chocolate. My dad was always a big M&M guy. A spoonful of peanut butter with M&Ms, that was the way to go. But fast forward, pandemic, I was still employed, but our company was shut down. So
Mm,
sitting at home, nothing to do. I probably spent 2 weeks gaming, doing things, little hobbies. And then I realized, man, this is actually getting boring, and I'm surprised. Started watching documentaries, and I saw the Netflix documentary Rotten. Specifically, it was about chocolate, and that
mm,
was just eye-opening. And I don't even know why, just a weird twist of fate that I had an entire bag of cocoa beans, um,
okay.
really, really dark roast. So I had no idea. But I said, hey, I'm going to go grind these up in the blender and see how that
Where
goes.
did you get those cocoa beans? You just bought them at the
That
store
was
once, or
It was bizarre. I don't know what made me do it, but I ordered a bag. It was
oh,
Navita's brand, I think
okay.
just for the health benefits or maybe
Mm,
caffeine.
mm,
And I had not even opened them. It was really weird timing. So I put that in a little $20 Hamilton Beach blender that's, like
mm,
this,
mhm.
and completely fried that motor. Made this gritty, awful mess, added sugar. I was just trying to proof a concept and didn't even temper it, threw it in the fridge, and it was pretty awful. But I was like, well, that's kind of cool. How do you actually do this? And that's when I started, I found
Okay.
a DCM melanger, 10-pound melanger, and I thought, well, that's cool too. But now my roasting, I don't like the consistency of my oven. What can I do? I got to
Mm,
use Beamer 1600,
mm,
roasting 2.5 pounds at a time. And I think that's when right at the start, the first bean I had was, I think I just ordered nibs. And it blew me away that there was this blueberry note. I think it was
mm.
Venezuelan. And
Okay.
it was just incredible. And I thought, there's even more to this than just the ethical side of it.
Mm,
There's these flavors that I didn't know existed in chocolate.
mm.
And then shortly after that, I found Madagascar, and that was kind of my first. That and Vietnam were the first two. And so this was March of 2020. By Christmas, I was giving out Christmas gifts to friends and family. And then the following spring, I was selling at the farmer's market.
Wow.
And 2022, moved back to the town where my wife and I went to college. Went to that farmer's market, and October of 2022, launched my online store, started doing some wholesaling because I was now out of the house and into
Hmm.
a commercial kitchen setting.
Mm.
So then all of last year I was selling at the market and online, and now we're here.
That's amazing. Wow. So it sounds like you were captivated by it. Just
Yeah.
started off more. There's quite a few now, like pandemic chocolate makers that sort of
Yeah.
discovered it at during that time. And kind of the same lines as that sort of ethical reason first, but then discovering the flavor of chocolate.
Right.
It's hard to explain to people that have never tried it how fascinating it is, like just a plain dark cocoa bean sugar, all that flavor. And you're like, where does it come from? How is it in this chocolate? So
Right.
what kept you motivated? Like, why did you just keep going with it? Because I imagine it was, a bit of a struggle as it is for
Oh
most people.
yeah. So if we rewind, March, I think, was when everything shut down. So I was starting my chocolate adventure as my firstborn was being born in April. So it was right around the same time. That whole
Mm.
summer we had a newborn, and I'm in the kitchen like every night making chocolate. So it was, I think at first it was a lot of the excitement of just learning. I'm an engineer by day.
Mm.
Um, so all the little bits of changing different variables to see what happens and different equipment to make it more efficient. That's kind of what motivates me. I just really love the business side of it. And
Okay.
then just that's what keeps me going. And obviously what got me into it was I couldn't eat chocolate anymore knowing what was going on.
What was going on? You meant like quality flavor wise or ethic wise or both?
What's the last estimate? 2.8 million children in Ghana and the Ivory Coast
Mm,
who are unpaid. So that's from the U.S. Department of Labor.
right.
That's their estimate. We don't know the exact number, but it should be zero.
Right. Right. I guess we kind of covered this already, but is there anything else that surprised you at the beginning of your journey when you were, whether buying equipment or making chocolate, other than the flavor?
Yeah, and I think it still surprises most of my customers is that chocolate is a fermented product. I didn't know about that step. I
Mm,
mean, most of my customers, they don't know, they just think chocolate is in a bag on the shelf.
right.
So
Most
when I
people
say
have
I
no
make
clue.
chocolate,
Yeah.
oh, you buy chocolate and then do
Right.
something to it? No.
Right.
It grows on a tree. It's
Right.
fermented on the ground in banana leaves. Like
Mm,
completely seems unsanitary, but it is like it's an agricultural product.
mm.
And I turn it into what you're eating. They have no clue. And I was completely ignorant to the fact that it was fermented. So that was eye-opening.
Yeah, it is. It fascinates me even to this day, doing tastings, and people have no conception of where chocolate comes from. Like, how do we get this block or these chips of chocolate? People have no clue. Even percentages, ask people, what does the percentage mean on a bar? And people
Mm.
see it. They've seen it their whole life and they have no clue. And I'm like, huh, wow, that.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the FDA legal definitions for chocolate and 10% cocoa mass. And then you've got white chocolate, they don't have a definition. So that
Right.
doesn't help the entire narrative of what is chocolate. Okay, well that's legally chocolate, but white chocolate isn't. But
Right.
then there's people who say, well, there is a real white chocolate, and then there's this other stuff that doesn't have any cocoa or cocoa butter in it at all, and we still call that white chocolate. So there's a lot of confusion out there.
What aspects, again, we might have covered this already, but what aspects of the chocolate making process do you feel consumers underappreciate?
One of the benefits of selling at the farmers market is I get to talk to these people and have conversations and hear those questions. And anytime I explain to someone how long the process takes,
Mm,
that's always, they cut me off and say, wait, how long?
mm,
Yeah, we refine it for 3 days. That's just one part.
right. Yeah.
But I think I did the math once just because I'm an engineering type and manufacturing engineering process improvement. I'm always tracking the times of each task.
Mm,
And I don't have a current number on it today, but I remember doing the math once and saying, wow, each one of these bars has 20 minutes of time in it. So I make a batch, let's call it 100 bars, 20 minutes per bar.
mm.
Just hold a bar and look at it for 20 minutes. And it's gone in less time than that.
Right. That's a really good point. Very interesting. And I didn't ask you this earlier, but what frustrated you or still frustrates you the most as far as the chocolate making process?
Yeah.
Something at the beginning that you're like, I hate doing this part, or
Yeah, we talk about this a lot. We have a Michigan chocolate makers group. We have a Zoom call weekly, but one of the things that
wow.
continues to come up is the gaps in the equipment. So there's entry level, I think the 10-pound Melanger that most people have is $300, $400.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the cheapest piece of equipment that you're going to get. And then you don't have a winnower for removing the husk. So you're using a hair dryer in a bowl, which takes an hour for like 2 pounds. I remember doing that frustratingly. So just to boil it down, you've got really cheap equipment for one part of the process. And if you want to upgrade, the next level is, I think, the 25-pound Melanger is 10 times the cost. Refiners are 8 to 10 grand just for not the refiner, the tempering machine.
Automatic tempering
That's
machine.
so expensive. Like we're doing it by hand for a long time. Roasters, the Beamer is great. It's a coffee roaster, so that's great, but it's slow. and you're supposed to let it cool down for an hour in between your 2.5 pound batches.
Right.
There are huge gaps in scaling up from hobbyist to professional. So
So
on the lower end.
from an engineer's point of view, do you think that there's opportunity for people out there to make better equipment, at for the smaller scale makers? What do you think?
It's challenging to do it stateside, and I
Mm,
think people would like to stay stateside.
mm,
Um, so my winnower was handmade, or it was welded by a coworker. So I'm sure the margins on it weren't built in a retail way. So,
right, right.
what I ended up with was the same price as what I could have purchased from Cocoa Town, but I had to design it myself and have him weld it up.
Hmm,
So
hmm.
I talked to another buddy, how could we take this and make it cheaper? But you'd have to make it cheaper twice, because you'd have to upsell it and then upsell it to your customer. So
Hmm.
I just don't know if
Mm,
there's room. Maybe
yeah,
if we spend a day looking at existing methods, could we strip out all the extra bells and whistles and make something cheap?
yeah.
I think it'd be worth looking at.
It's an interesting point because there's a lot of makers out there who do well with those 10-pound melangers. They have a few
Yeah.
of them. They sell at markets. They're doing well.
Mhm.
Like they have maybe a small tabletop tempering machine, like a Revolution or something, and that's all
Yeah.
good. But then, like when it comes to the winnowing and maybe roasting and whatnot, it can be a bit of a jump for a lot of
Yeah.
people. So,
Well, even in the tempering,
and the tempering.
we get a lot of waste from tempering.
Mm,
Just the different surfaces that it's touching
right,
to warm it up, and then
right.
we use a funnel. Some people use a cup, but when you're pouring, you're losing a lot. Just the margin of error during tempering by hand. We use the seed method with silk. There's just a lot that can go wrong, and it would be a heck of a lot easier if you could press a button and stuff would
Yeah,
come. I know there's those can be finicky too, but
they can, but once they
no doubt,
work, yeah.
yeah.
No, that's an interesting point too for consumers, that idea of tempering. Oh, you make your chocolate, it's melted, you put it in the mold. But man, there's so much more, like you said, finicky things in between there and the process and the time. That's definitely something people don't appreciate.
There's a brand in Canada, starts with an S. It's I can't remember right now, but they have almost like ketchup packets, a little bit bigger, and it's untempered. So their instructions are you can either open it and eat it, or you can melt it first in the package,
Hmm.
tear off the corner and squeeze it. And I thought, man, that's a great way to cut your costs and
Yeah.
sell it to me as an upsell. So maybe
I
we
haven't
have to
heard of
get
that one.
rid of
That's
that.
interesting.
I
But
think
yeah.
it's Socati.
No,
Yeah.
there's definitely, I've seen people do things like that with untempered chocolate. And to be honest, for people that want to use chocolate for other things, it doesn't need to be
Yeah.
tempered. A lot of people don't
Right.
realize that. So there
Yeah.
is an
I
opportunity
sold
there.
bricks, untempered bricks to local bakers, and they've
Yeah.
made,
Why
cherry
not?
chip scones with Madagascar chocolate. You can't
Mhm.
tell what's a cherry and what's the chip. The stuff like that's pretty
Very
cool.
cool. It's easy to sell your bars to those who value what you do. And there are people out there who sort of understand what it is craft chocolate's about. But how do you reach the consumers who are more skeptical? They feel the price is too high. They just don't get what it is that you're
Yeah.
doing. How do you reach them?
Yeah. If after explaining it to them, if there's still reservations, then it's really a budget thing.
Mhm.
Um, if I'm telling you this chocolate tastes better, and it's not on the backs of child labor. The one that you're used to is not as good flavor, and there's child labor involved.
Mhm.
If I tell you that and you still don't want to buy mine, then it's a budget. And I can't get upset when someone can't afford my bar. It's not cheap. At the end of the day, it's a chocolate bar. It's not something that you're eating every day. If you want to compare it to coffee,
Right.
people have a cup of coffee a day. Some people go to Starbucks every day. I don't know why that's different, but it is. Chocolate's just not a
That's a
staple.
cultural thing that we
Yeah,
created, right?
right. So some people buy a $5 bottle of wine and that's their limit, and that's fine.
Right.
And other people, they're just not my market, and that's okay.
It's a good point too, because a lot of people I don't like to make people feel guilty for
Yeah,
eating
yeah.
Lindt bars and whatnot, but it is a good point to say, hey, even with child slave labor aside, the fact of the people, the adults there
Oh
work
yeah.
there, they don't have much of a living either. And so if you think about it, it's like, would you yourself go to work 12, 14 hours hard labor and bring really nothing back home? Like you probably
Right,
wouldn't do that. And so
right.
this is sort of what we're perpetuating. And it's a fine line to get that across without offending people, but it's an
Yeah,
important
yeah.
topic to think about for sure.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I almost don't drive it home. Um, you just kind of say it's ethically sourced.
Right.
And if they ask a question,
Hmm.
then we can go down that route. And I usually cite the Department of Labor about how
Mm.
many children are there. And like you said, there's more than just the children. But um, I, a good sales tactic is to not make your customers feel guilty.
Right.
They'll get a yucky feeling and walk away anyway.
Exactly.
So yeah, I just mention it in passing. It's ethically sourced from farms all the way all around the world. And if they say, well, what do you mean ethically sourced? Then that opens the conversation.
Right.
But yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And I like what some people say, where it's not, people say, oh, your chocolate's very expensive. But if you think about it properly with this in mind, it's the other stuff is too cheap. It really
Oh
should
yeah,
not be that cheap.
yeah,
That's the problem, and that's what we're used to, unfortunately.
right. And sometimes I am met with someone who is aggressively telling me my product is price gouging, and I'll say, well, if I could pay the price that Hershey's pays for their cocoa beans, I could compete. But
Right.
you're asking me to compete with grape juice when I'm selling wine. It's not the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same process.
So your chocolate is not fair trade certified. And for me, I say that that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So what makes it better than fair trade certified chocolate?
Yeah. So maybe I'm skeptical. There were
Mm,
documentaries about those different certifications,
mm,
and they cost a lot of money. So not just for me, but thinking of the farmers, um, they can't afford that certification on a farm by farm basis. USDA organic is another one that costs a lot
mm,
of money. Um, so I wouldn't want them to spend all their annual earnings on a certification that all it does is have someone go there. I don't know how often they'd have to go there, but they just have to pass the test one time.
mm,
But in addition to that, fair trade, can't remember if it's 10, 15, or 20, but 10% above the going rate. Well, 10% of zero is still nothing.
mhm.
So oftentimes I'm paying upwards to 5 times per pound for cocoa beans compared to the going rate. So that's well above fair trade pricing.
Mm,
And that's usually the red flag when I'm sourcing beans is when they're so cheap. I look at that and say, well, if it's that cheap, then there's something going on here. They're not getting paid enough. So that's one of the ways to almost guarantee without certification that people are getting paid. You know who you're paying,
right,
you know where that money goes. So as long as that farmer's making the money, then that's the higher probability that they're going to pay their employees. If they can pay themselves and have extra, then they can pay their employees. I don't think it's a matter of having a certification to go enforce this. It's a matter of having those people, they need enough money to actually do what we want them to do. So let's
right,
just pay them the right amount.
right. And it kind of goes in hand because fair trade certified is not synonymous with quality. It's still the same.
Yeah,
It could be the same bulk cacao. It could be a little better
right,
sometimes, but when you're dealing with fine cacao, a lot of these farmers probably not going to grow it anyway if it's not worth their while, right? So
right,
there's that as well. And obviously 100 you can't 100% guarantee any of this,
right,
because
right,
who knows what the farm manager, how is he distributing the money to the locals and,
right.
and that sort of, we don't know all
Yeah,
that all the time, but it's a much more in the fine chocolate world and the sources you're getting your cacao. There's a lot more clarity there, right? And that's the big point. Even with the fair trade certification, there's still not a lot of clarity. There's a lot of
right,
separation between people making the chocolate and people using the cacao, whereas not just the country it's coming from, but the region, the co-ops, all that sort of stuff,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
it's really
people
important.
ask me that too as well. How do you know? Well, I don't. that's the fact of the matter for the industry is unless I'm there every day, there's no way I would know. But the best thing we can do is build relationships, form trust, and that's kind of all you have.
Yeah.
Even with certification, it still comes down to trust.
And that's what good business is, I think, is building relationships and trustworthy relationships. You know, that is possible in the business world, and a lot of people in the chocolate world are doing that. Definitely.
Yeah.
So it is possible. Can you tell us more about your line of products? Do you have any ideas for future products that you wish to share?
Yeah. So, like I said, it started with Madagascar and Vietnam. I slowly added more, took out some that so weren't the greatest. So I've tuned the roasting profiles over time. But right now we've got Madagascar, which you see behind me, Vietnam. We just added Uganda from Seniliki Forest, which is really cool. That's like a co-op of 5,000 farmers, and they actually make their own chocolate, which is really cool. We've got Colombia. I had 2 from Colombia. I'm phasing one out and sticking with one that has some whiskey notes. And so that's like the primary lineup. I always want to do these limited edition single origins just because I want to try them. And I know a lot of my customers are excited for the next one. So they're addicted just like I am. The latest one I haven't launched yet, but it's San Martin, Peru. Raspberry, strawberry with basil notes. Really interesting. I'm excited about it. But then things I'm looking forward to. I've had this on the back burner. We have an oat milk bar, 60, I think it's 65% oat milk, but I get a lot of requests for milk chocolate. So I think I'm really going to have to do that. And the other one that I get a lot of requests for is sugar free. And I'm picky about the sugar.
Yeah.
I'll really have to try it, but there's so many sugar alcohols. There's, honey, maple. There's a lot of different ways you can go. And I really want to try out monk fruit sweetener. However, all the monk fruit on the market is typically a mix of erythritol and monk fruit sweetener. So I found it's too expensive almost, but monk fruit pure, which is actually an antioxidant that tastes sweet. So it's not even fruit sugar. So I'm really excited to see if that turns out. If it does, then that'll be exciting for a lot of people who truly want sugar-free. We'll see.
Yeah, sugar-free is difficult for the craft chocolate makers because it's all about quality and flavor. And those sugar alcohols can add really bad flavors. So people don't understand that. You can do it, but you might not be proud of the product you're creating, right?
Oh, sugar is something that I think a lot of makers are overlooking, and I'll give away what I know. But I used to get the Costco sugar. In the first year I was doing it, Costco is cheap, USDA organic, cane sugar, that's fine. But then I started to notice from Madagascar to Vietnam to, I think I was doing Ecuador at the time, they each have this common flavor. And I thought, well, that's not a cocoa flavor. So why do they each have this flavor? It was from the sugar. So then I started getting the sugar from the Green Cane Project in Brazil. And that sugar is just sweet. It doesn't really bring a lot of its own flavor. And when I switched to that, it was like probably a 20% improvement in flavor. But just between the each origin, they each started to kind of separate. And that was huge for us. So if anyone's not using a really good sugar source, I recommend Green Cane.
Right.
I think the brand is native, but that's the project.
That's a really good point. I think a lot of people underestimate the power that the sugar has, just sugar source. And, for some people, they don't mind those added flavors from the unrefined sugar. But if you're a purist and you really want to taste the cacao, obviously it makes a big difference. But sugar is a contentious issue too, because then do I go sort of refined beet sugar, whereas it's also neutral? Then people have an issue with that as well. So sugar.
I mean, even the vegan aspect.
Right.
The sugar, American sugar, most of the time is processed through bone meal, so it's not vegan. Right. This farm down there, they spin it in a centrifuge to filter it, so that's what makes it vegan.
And you were mentioning earlier, Oh, I guess I should make some milk products. Well, what's been preventing you from doing that? Why not?
Oh yeah, just growing pains and trying to keep everything I have in stock.
Mm,
Um, Adding more products slowly. We just got a 25-pound melanger and a larger roaster to keep up with that. So that should help a lot. And then once we get that, we get ahead a little bit more.
mm,
That'll buy us the time to then go back and innovate with our extra time. Um,
okay.
but yeah, just time and increased volume of output.
Can you tell us more about if you've noticed any trends from your customers in regards to preferences, what attracts them to your chocolate? What have you noticed over the few years?
Yeah. One of the other things I do, if it's not a new single origin, I'll do a flavored bar,
Mm,
infusions, usually just powdered, freeze dried and powdered fruit. That's all I've messed with right now. I'd like to do almonds, but orange was a huge hit. Now,
okay.
Michigan, in Kalamazoo specifically, I don't know if you've had Oberon, but here, because we have Bell's Brewery right here, when Oberon releases every year, it's a holiday. I mean, it's Oberon Day. There's a big party in town. So to honor that, I made an orange chocolate, and people seem to really love that one. But I think what sold even better was coffee. So adding
Mm,
5% of the total, just swapping out those beans with coffee beans
hmm.
was not only did it sell really quick, I think people just love coffee with chocolate, but
Mm,
I was shocked. The coffee we used was from a local place here in town. The coffee had notes listed of grapefruit, or white grape,
okay.
and you could not really taste that in the coffee. Like it's
Mm,
subtle. But when
mm,
you put that into chocolate, you get the cocoa, but then that coffee brings this screaming white grape note that
mm.
was so loud. I thought that's
Wow.
only 5% and it's that bright.
Mm,
So that was just incredible. And I'm excited to do more coffee, specifically with like special tasting notes like that. I want to see how they
hmm,
pop in
hmm.
chocolate.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. It sounds really interesting. You don't get a lot of white grape. I haven't come across those flavor notes in chocolate.
Yeah,
So
that was really interesting.
yeah. Okay. And how did your friends and family react into this, this venture? You mentioned you started sharing your chocolate once it was starting to taste a bit better. So did they appreciate what it is that you do? Did they require a lot of education from your point to
No,
appreciate it?
I think a lot of my friends, maybe they didn't know all the details. They probably knew some funny business was going on in the industry, but um, yeah, I don't think I'm going to change the purchasing decisions of everyone. It's kind of difficult with
Mm,
chocolate and this being a more expensive product, but yeah, my friends and family love the chocolate, and um, fortunately for most of them, they're getting all the defect bars, the ones that are too ugly to sell, so they don't
yeah.
have to purchase it. But yeah, they love seeing what's new and what's going on, and
Yeah.
um, I'm sure I bug the hell out of them when I'm telling them all about all this stuff. So
When I was living at home and doing tons of baking and whatnot, my family would only get the rejects. And they're like, can we ever just get the nice finished
yeah,
product? I was like, no, it's for someone else.
yeah, there, and that's the thing with hand tempering is there's going to be aesthetic defects, just maybe overflow or
Yeah.
underpour,
Yeah.
or even just shrinkage in the mold. You'll get like a ring, and
Mm.
if they're not too bad, I'll sell them. But sometimes they get pretty gnarly, and I think they're cool. It doesn't impact the flavor or the quality, but we'll hold those ones back, and they can be
Right.
samples, or I'll eat them at home.
How would you describe the style of your chocolate? Whether it's, flavor, texture, appearance, what do you want your chocolate to say to consumers?
Yeah, I think just from trying so many, there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of infusions and mashups, peanut butter this, raspberry that,
Mhm.
and maybe it's a detriment to my sales, but I really like to focus on the pure single origin.
Mm,
I really like to try to find that ideal roasting profile and bring that out. Some people would say, well, you can't really do that unless you're you can't do that while having 4 bars that are all 70% dark chocolate. Whereas some people would say Madagascar, for example, should be ideally 72%, maybe, but I think a lot of my roasting profiles bring a lot of the fruity notes forward. Even in the Colombian, which is more chocolate focused, that whiskey note is sort of in the fruity realm, and I like that to be bright too. So I think just by happenstance, not on purpose, our bars tend to be a little bit brighter on the fruity side.
What are some goals you have for your business, and what do you hope to achieve beyond, making high quality chocolate? Are there other goals connected to your business that are important?
Right now, I'm pushing to get in more coffee shops. This is something we were talking about in our Michigan group, is craft beer and craft chocolate sort of similar. Like we're in the early days of that.
Yeah.
But the one benefit that craft beer had was people go to a bar. Some people go every day after work. Like bars, that's a destination. So if you're a bar in the early days of craft beer and you say, we're making our own beer, everyone's going to be going to your bar. They already go to a bar every day. With chocolate, you're not going to a chocolate store after work every day. So it doesn't have that opportunity to grow. So what industry is better at, latching onto than coffee? Because people already understand beans that come from fruit that you're roasting. Single origins taste different. If you take a chocolate bar and say, hey, all of that in this, it's so easy to communicate. And then in addition, that's not a high ticket location. They're not ordering a meal there or racking up a bar bill. They're getting $4, $5 coffee. They can add on a chocolate bar every once in a while. So I think it's a great spot to educate and to actually make sales. And the network already exists. So it's just a matter of knocking on the door and saying, do you want some better chocolate here? And a lot of coffee places love that whole single origin craft environment. So it's a really,
there's so many parallels to craft chocolate and fine coffee. And if those customers already appreciate single origin coffee, it's not much of a leap to get into the chocolate either.
Yeah. So that would be the goal in the business.
But you know what, though, speaking on the coffee as well.
Yeah.
Mochas, it's really hard to find good mochas. If more coffee shops were using a lot of this craft chocolate to make their mochas, oh my goodness, it would be incredible.
Yeah.
Get rid of those syrups and all that sort of stuff.
I know. And it's funny you say that. I'll name drop Roasting Plant Coffee. They're doing just brewed coffee just for you, or just roasted, sorry. So they're a high-end coffee shop. So I'm in a few of their locations, and we started doing single origin hot chocolate in their stores. So it's not too far to say, well, you're already using this to make your hot chocolate. How can we make a mocha? And I think it has to be a syrup. So I actually had a recipe. Well, it's easier to work with. So the thing with the hot chocolate, I'm having to grind it up. I actually have an ice shaver coming in this weekend. So I can kind of get it finer, because trying to melt that in just the limited amount of time that they have to heat up the milk, like that is not a lot of time.
Yeah.
Whereas when I make it at home, it's on a stove, I'm using a frother. They don't have all that time. So a syrup, and that's why there's Dutch processed cocoa, but I'm thinking a syrup might blend better. So I might develop that, but it's going to be hard to compete on cost.
It is. Yeah.
But
honestly, I love just well-shaved chocolate and sort of froth it with the milk. I know some people have an issue putting in the machine there, but I think it doesn't really take much more time, and you get an incredible either hot chocolate or mocha from that. But you do have to grate the chocolate. You have to find a machine that grates it quite fine.
And that's hard because we're using a food processor. It can heat up if you go too long, then pieces get smaller and you start melting. But anyway, so I'd say that's a goal for right now, is trying to get into more coffee shops. I think for the industry that helps with education, because ultimately to help the farmers, we need to sell more beans. That's what they've said. They said,
Exactly. Yeah.
can I tip? Can I put at checkout, tip the farmer? Said, no, don't do that. Buy more beans. So, okay, we'll do that. So one of the other things that I think would be cool, this is a dream big goal, but if I could own a farm at origin or partner with a farm that doesn't have exposure to the craft chocolate market, I think that would be a really cool way to not only set myself apart, but really impact their life and their community and get more direct. Because we're not big enough to order an entire shipping container of beans yet.
Yeah.
But dreaming big, that'd be really cool to have those direct partnerships with some farmers.
Yeah, that's in an ideal world, that's what it would be like, two parties negotiating, the maker and the growers, and buying directly from them. So all the money goes back into the pockets where it should be, right?
Right.
So, and that's the most sustainable for long term, definitely.
Yeah, and I appreciate the two big suppliers that come to mind in the US are Meridian and Uncommon.
Of course.
And they're huge. I mean, this industry, I don't know if craft chocolate makers could be where they are if it weren't for the volumes that those two importers are able to bring us. So that's been huge. And the price point with them has been huge. I think if I wanted to go away from them, I'd be paying more because the person I'm buying from isn't buying in large enough quantities, or I'd be paying less because the origin, that importer doesn't care about the quality standards or the ethical side of it. Right. So we're kind of stuck with what we have, and that's a good thing because they're great.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got a long way to go before each chocolate maker can have enough volume to bring in and source directly.
Yeah. Having companies like them is incredible. That's what's kind of fueling a lot of these beginner small makers. But at some point too, it's wonderful when makers can also find farmers, people they know, and buy directly from them. That's really going to make a lot of change in both people's lives. Definitely.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of gaps in this whole mission. One of the gaps is actually going from your kitchen to an actual commercial kitchen environment. Some states you can make food out of your home. Michigan is not one of those. So now if I want to sell at coffee shops and in grocery stores, I had to move my operation into a space that I'm leasing, and that's a ton of overhead.
Yeah.
So for a lot of these people, how do you make that jump?
Yeah.
Well, they have a cap in Michigan for how much you're allowed to make before you have to get out of your kitchen, and it's not enough to cover the overhead of actually having your own space. So you can go to a commercial kitchen and lease space from them, but it's going to cost you more than an hourly worker per hour to be there. So your chocolate gets even more expensive. So I guess one of the big gaps is there a chocolate making, like a co-packer that's not huge, but like a craft chocolate in high volume, where all these people who are just trying to scale, they can get in on 100-pound batch of chocolate, and they can take 10 pounds of it. The other 9 pounds go to 9 other people. That might work. Yeah. They can share that cost without the overhead and without the equipment. Maybe that's something that would lift all ships.
Yeah, that's definitely an important point for the public to understand too. That's that aspect as well. Because we don't really see that a lot, and that does add a lot to the cost, and it hinders a lot of people as well. And chocolate, it's not like making bread and cookies. The ingredients are expensive. The time, you can't just bake a batch of chocolate in a few hours. It's a lot more overhead.
That's one of those things. Is you leave your refiner on for 3 days, the commercial kitchen is going to charge me for that time. Right. And then when I go to make chocolate, well, there's 4 other people using hot ovens, and this whole place is hot and humid. No, it's got to be like 68 and low humidity. It has to be perfect, or else everything will melt.
Interesting. It seems like there's even opportunity for other food processing places to rent out, part of their kitchen and part of their spaces and things like that.
Yeah. A lot of churches have kitchens that go unused, and I've thought
Oh,
that's a huge network,
yeah,
maybe an
yeah.
opportunity. Uh, but I think
Interesting.
there's probably a lot of unused kitchens in spaces like that. But churches, I just think comes to mind because it seems like there's one on every corner and
Mhm.
have kitchens. So
And they always seem empty, so why not?
yeah, right.
Helps but everybody. So the bean to bar world is growing, but there's always room for improvement. So can you point out any aspects that can be improved so that we can continue to grow and continue to do a better job? Are there anything that you see, this can be done better?
I think it goes hand in hand with, I mean, you might hear Kevin O'Leary say on Shark Tank, he doesn't want to be involved in a product where you have to educate the consumer.
Mhm.
Well, that's craft chocolate. So,
Yeah,
um,
he wouldn't be on board.
so being the bar world, I've told people about this app and this map.
Mhm.
Um, I think makers and stores and the people who are actually doing the selling or the making or beans, they seem to be aware of it because we want to get our message out there. But it doesn't seem like my consumer knows about it. And that's hard to do. I get
Yeah,
advertising and
yeah,
it would take so much money to get so much exposure. But if there was one wish from that, I think the idea is exactly what we need for consumers to have a tool to go find craft chocolate. People always ask, well, where can I get it? And how do I know it's ethical and
yeah,
in the bar? Well, it's
yeah.
your app. How do we get them to know about
That's exactly why I created it. Is people ask, where do I get it? Where do I get it? It's,
it? Yeah.
it's much easier to say, just go to this app and find who's around you, find who's in a
Yeah.
place near you. And it's a pretty great tool, but I agree with you. Yeah, I definitely have to do a lot more advertising and push that
Well,
out there.
and it's hard too because sure you're advertising to consumers, but then at some point it turns around to, well, there's nobody near me. So then we got to go get all these coffee shops. Maybe I'll work on my end, you work on yours, and I'll send you all my coffee shops. That's a question for you. Do all your chocolate makers on the app send you their retail accounts, like where their stuff is located?
Mm,
Because that could be an opportunity to expand the map.
right, right. No, I've thought of that too. Right now you'd have to go to the maker's website and see who
Right.
their stockists are. But yeah, that would definitely be another level to add. So
Because
that's
I'll tell you, in Michigan, um, there are three that I know of, and there might be more, but the biggest one is in Detroit in Midtown, Monger's Provisions. They've got cheese, wine, and chocolate. And they have a wall, it's probably 15 feet long and 10 bars high. And it's like everything you've ever seen.
right.
That's
No,
what
there
I
are
want everywhere.
right. Yeah, no, there are places for that on the app. There's the retail section. So,
Yeah.
it's not like a floral shop that happens to sell a couple of bars. That's not on there. But if it's a big retailer, distributor of chocolate, yeah, they can definitely be
Okay.
on the app too. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And there needs to be more of those, just
yeah,
like craft chocolate. You go
yeah,
to the beer aisle, there's a whole section.
yeah,
I go to the chocolate aisle, it's this big, and they're all less than $5. It's hard to
right.
compete.
Yeah, that's a tough. I've heard from other makers too, trying to get into the even like the higher end grocery stores, the boutique shops.
Yeah.
They'll sell a lot of expensive cheeses and whatnot, but when it comes to
Hmm.
chocolate, once you reach that $6 mark or something like that, they can't. They're not looking
Well,
at it.
and it's interesting too, because when I lived in Ann Arbor, um, there's some higher end clientele there, but Plum Market is a higher kind of like a Whole Foods but local.
Mm,
And by their registers, I don't know what made them decide that, but that's where they have all the single origin chocolate, and nobody else is doing that. And that's a great
mm,
way to do it because you're at checkout. Stuff is usually more
hmm
expensive at
hmm
checkout, and I don't know. It's easier when
Interesting.
you're competing against other $10, $12 chocolate bars.
And from a chocolate maker's perspective, is there any information that you wish you knew early on that would have saved a lot of time, a lot of heartache during your learning process?
That's a tough one. I should have known about this question.
It's okay.
Um,
You can't
yeah,
answer
I
it.
mean, there's just been a lot of learning the whole
Yeah.
way. I don't think anything that really, nothing particular jumps out. There's
Mm,
just a ton of little tiny challenges that are tricky, have already been solved. You
mm,
have to go find the information and then do it. I think I think I knew it was going to be expensive. Um, I think the sales side, I do a lot of my sales through wholesale, and the
mm,
farmers market's great too. I was surprised about the e-commerce side of it. And it's probably because we're still small, only a few years old, but like the traffic online, unless it's paid traffic, there's not a lot of organic sales.
mm,
And I don't know, my just looking back, I think I was naive about the estimates of um, organic online sales,
mm,
which
mm.
it's fine. You pivot, you go wholesale and local, and that works just fine. But
Yeah. And where do you sell your chocolate today? Where do you ship? How can people reach you?
yeah, um, we're just in the US for shipping. I have shipped a couple things to Australia. I think somebody won a giveaway on Instagram, and then I found out they
Mm.
were in Australia, and I said, "All right, put a couple blocks of ice in there." But that's the main reason is just the shipping cost and the I don't know what the climate is where I'm sending it or the path to there. So I don't want to ship melted chocolate. So for right
Mm,
now, just in the US, online, chocolathethunder.us. Um, in wholesale, we're not in a ton of places, a few places around Kalamazoo. The one big one is Roasting Plant. So they're in Detroit, Washington, D.C., New York. They have a lot of other locations. I'm hoping that I can get into some of those too. But
mhm.
um, yeah, so
Wonderful. It's really nice to hear what you were mentioning earlier about you guys sort of building this community of chocolate makers in Michigan.
yeah,
I think that's really great. I think that's really important. I think it's going to help a lot. So,
yeah. Festival. We had our first Michigan Chocolate
oh,
Festival in
okay.
September. We're hoping to do more with that. It was a big hit. We were kind of caught off guard by how busy it was. I know there's other chocolate festivals, but
Mm-hmm.
if it turns into something bigger, that might be. I'll let you know. Do you have festivals on your app?
I do. I don't have a lot added, but I do have that category. So
Yeah.
definitely,
So
I'll
I'll get
try.
on that list then.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Wonderful. Well, really nice to talk to you, Connor. It was wonderful to learn all about what it is you do. Sounds like you're very determined, very passionate about all this. So I expect to see a lot in the future. But I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate what you're doing. This is a critical tool in
Well, thank you.
educating our consumers. So thank you.
Thank you so much. All the best. Take care.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Download the free Bean to Bar app to connect with incredible chocolate makers from around the world. Also, be sure to visit beantobarworld.com, your portal for all things fine chocolate, virtual tastings, free learning resources, research, and much more. Subscribe to the newsletter to stay in touch and donate to the free app and free resources here. Contact me for any chocolate related questions you may have.